Hello and welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. I'm Tim Hayes. I'm your host for the first hour. So welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. Today is Thursday, October 2nd, 2025. As always, we're grateful to everyone who's joining us here today, whether you're listening live or through the archives, as we spend another couple of hours teaching and supporting people in using some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools I've ever encountered. These tools are available absolutely free through the tireless efforts of Dr. Michael and Jeannie Rice on the website at whyagain.org. If you go to that website and click on the two words that say Start Here in the upper left-hand corner, it will take you to a page where you can download and read Chapter 24 of Dr. Michael Rice's book. His book is titled, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And that chapter of the book contains a narrative description and explanation of the primary tool in this work. That tool is called the Reality Management Worksheet, sometimes called the Reality Management Wake-Up Sheet. It's a tool I've been using to great effect for over 21 years now to improve the quality of my life and most of my relationships, and to turn any negative emotional experience I have into part of the infallible guidance system that each and every one of us has been given. You can also download the actual worksheet process itself from that page. You can also download a whole host of audio files of shows just like this one where people have been stepped through the worksheet process, and if you choose to listen to them, even repeatedly, they can serve as a powerful tutorial for you to help you get maximum benefit from these tools in the shortest amount of time possible. You can also go to your app store and type in the three words Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness. And if you choose to do that, before you're done typing the word forgiveness, you'll see the glowing heart icon. If you tap on that, it will let you download a completely free and private app that contains the Reality Management Worksheet. It contains an abbreviated version of that worksheet process, and it contains a copy of the Dragon Klingon game, which is a wonderful way to introduce these tools to even younger audiences. Here in Mind Shifters Radio, we hope people do all of that soon and often, primarily because it tends to improve the quality of people's lives the more they actively apply these tools in their lives. And secondarily, because it tends to prompt comments, questions, answers, and testimonials. If you have any of those to share with us, we hope you would choose to do so. You can email me at tjh@mindshifters-academy.org. or you can email Jeannie at jeanie@whyagain.org. That's whyagain.org. And if we get a question or a comment or a testimonial or even a refutation from you, we'll address it on the internet show, and then as time allows, send you a notification about what day and time that occurred so you can listen back to the archives for your feedback or your input. If you have the option to join us live, most weekdays from 11 until noon Central Time, we're here, and you can go to zoom.us and open up a window and type in the meeting ID number 853-2357-4173. That's 853-2357-4173. And you can also use one of the many numbers that Zoom makes available and just call in on your phone and enter that same meeting ID, 853-2357-4173. Once you're on, you'll be automatically muted, and you can unmute and then toggle from between mute and unmute using *6. And as I mentioned, I like to mention each episode of the show, we greatly appreciate whenever anybody does that, because it makes it so much easier for us to live into our intention with this work. The intention we have with this work is to be of service, and that's just so much easier to do when we know how these things are landing for you. And it's, help us help you. Give us the feedback. So Plenty of time for comments, questions, answers, soliloquies. My my offering for today is multifaceted, which I suppose is pretty common. The first thing that I will mention and put out here is that there's to my eye and ear, a delightful, or an important podcast that was just published by Roger McFillin. And his podcast is, the title of it is Radically Genuine. And this particular episode, episode 203, is titled The ADHD Myths Exposed. And in it, he interviews Roman, Roman, Wyden, Wyden, who has a new book. I believe the title for it is ADHD is Over. And if you go to ADHDisover.com, you can get access to the book and some of the podcasts he's done. And so the quick summary here at the end of that podcast intro says, together, Roger McFillin and Roman Wyden expose how 6 million children in America are prescribed stimulants like Adderall and Ritalin, the billion-dollar ADHD industry that profits from it, and why more parents are waking up and saying ADHD is over. Now, the struggle is real. That's what you'll read on the website. The struggle that people have when they've got these characteristics or traits or patterns of behavior that get labeled as ADHD. It's a real struggle, right? Our culture isn't optimized for the comfort and success of every type of person in it. It just isn't. And our school systems are not designed for creative types, and they're not designed for high energy people. They're not even designed for kids. They're just designed to produce a certain outcome and to keep the system churning. And in that context, somebody who is highly creative, highly intuitive, emotionally sensitive, energy sensitive, they aren't going to do well unless there's a nearly miraculous set of circumstances that come together for them. So the things that people experience when they say, well, I have ADHD, or the things they experience are real, but the explanation for why is completely made up. The label is completely made up. And the ideas that Roman Wyden puts out really resonate with me. They're very compatible with what I've done with people in therapy for decades now. It's highly consistent with what I consider to be an intelligent, observationally based approach. It takes deep honesty. It takes willingness to deal with life on life's terms, and to recognize that, you know what, if I've got a problem and I turn to a drug to fix it, and I'm raising kids and they see me do that, and they have a problem and I turn to drugs to fix that problem, that's what they learn. So it shouldn't be too surprising that kids who are raised on these drugs end up turning to drugs and alcohol abuse more than other kids who aren't raised on these drugs, because they've learned, listen, if I got a problem in here, the solution is find the right pill. And the kind of thing, the serendipity in this is, it's unique to me and a couple people that I work with. But this morning, as I was listening to the podcast, I was getting a message from a father who has a I think it's an 8-year-old boy who has this label, and he's divorced. But his, for quite a while, his ex and he had a very amicable relationship for a couple of years, and were raising the kids. And yet there was a significantly different experience when the father would have his son at his house and the mother would have their son at her house. She had such an experience with his disruptive behavior that she decided medication, as recommended by the schools, etc., is the right approach. He never found that that was beneficial because he wasn't having those problems with behavior coming out of his son when the son was visiting his house, so he wouldn't give him the Ritalin or the medication or whatever. And now the mother is trying to take him to court to say he's being abusive to the boy because he won't give him this stimulant medication on the weekends when he's with his dad. And so the synchronicity there of this podcast that comes out and says, hey, look, there's all kinds of different ways to deal with the struggles that people have when they've got a creative mind or they've got a highly sensitive mind, or, there are all kinds of people that have studied this and written books about this over the years, including, books like Hunter versus Farmer, right? The whole mindset that has to be different from somebody who does farming for a living versus somebody who goes out into the wild and is hunting for a living and has to be aware that, there are dangers out in the field. There are other animals that may not know that I consider myself the top of the food chain, right? They might think they're above me on the food chain and I look like a good dinner. So the hunter internal mentality and screening for dangers and high level alert doesn't get generated for most farmers. And in many, as they talk about, it doesn't even get turned on as a potential mode of operating for people who are in the farming mentality. And so I just direct you to the idea that there's this very useful podcast related to attention deficit disorder and hyperactivity and the meds that are used and the nature of that label and a more functional medicine approach. In other words, a whole body, a whole system approach to looking at, okay, so what's going on in the family system and in the individual biology of an individual who gets labeled in their youth, in their single digit years, ADHD or attention deficit with hyperactivity disorder. Or now they've got a new one, ADHD. So it's autism blended with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, etc. It's a wild, crazy system. It's made up, and this is a resource that might help people, whether they're adults or adults with children, start to look at their life and the struggles they're having and the potential resources for resolution, start to look at them in a very different way. So there is that.
Dr. Tim, what's the name of it's Journey's Dream, Roger McFillin?
No, it is not Journey's Dream. This is
Okay.
simply Roger McFillin.
Okay.
And his podcast, Radically Genuine.
Okay.
The Radically Genuine podcast, episode number 203, titled ADHD Myths Exposed. And with that, Susan Bingham dropped off the call. So I'm sure she'll come back. It's usually just a technical difficulty when she's done that. And that's that. That was. I just wanted to make sure I put that out there today. The upcoming book. It's supposed to be released tomorrow. ADHD is over. He's also working on a documentary, and he has a podcast titled ADHD is over. So you can listen to Roman Wyden in those various ways, even before the book comes out tomorrow, or if you choose not to invest in the book. But he said he kept the book down to 150 pages to make it really accessible for people. He says with himself, he frequently hits about page 150 in a book, and he says, you know what, I don't think I really need to read anymore. I think I get what the book's about. So he tried to keep this concise as he was writing his own book. So there you have that. That's the ADHD is over update. And if nobody else has any questions or comments, I will return to the reading of the book by Guy Finley. The book by Guy Finley is titled, all right, so somebody's asking in a text message, would you repeat his name, please? Okay, so there's two names to repeat. One of them is Dr. Roger McFillin, M-C capital F-I-L-L-I-N. And Roger's podcast is titled Radically Genuine. And his guest in episode 203 is Roman, R-O-M-A-N, Wyden, W-Y-D-E-N. And his book is titled ADHD is Over. ADHDisover.com is the website you can go to see more about him. So that was Julia, I guess, who asked that in the chat. So thank you for the chat question.
Thank you.
You're very welcome and deserving. And if no other questions or comments, which we actively invite, we try to remember to do that every show, every time around, I will welcome your comments or questions even as I'm reading. And in the book by Guy Finley, the latest book that's a pre-publication copy, publisher's advanced copy, it says, which you might be able to get if you make a donation to the Life of Learning Foundation, or guyfinley.org. And contact them if you're interested and ask about, how you might acquire the publisher's advanced copy. And they can help you out if that's a possibility. This book is titled The Book of One Love, One Life, One Journey. Redefining Strength is the topic of the title of the next section. Redefining Strength, the Surprising Truth. And Guy Finley writes, by and large, at least for most of us, it seems very important that we appear strong in the eyes of others. No one can push us around. That should we wish it, we have the power to pretty much take what we want. So we try to gather to ourselves the symbols of this so-called strength that we imagine that might be things like a ripped body, wealth, influence. And often these efforts to make ourselves appear strong end up putting us in conflict, even at war, with others who seem to be after the same thing. However, do we ever ask, what is the real source of strength? Do we really control our physical strength when sickness and age can drain us of it? And when we fear the ravages of time? Does money really give us strength when we're always afraid it can be lost? Or we're afraid we won't have enough? Or we see that nothing we buy ever fills up the empty space for very long? Does power over others really make us strong? when we can face rebellion and be dethroned by others who wish to be strong themselves, or when one dissenting voice fills us with rage, is that really power? The fact is that none of these forms of strength are real strength because they're not permanent. They don't give us a constant sense of command, and they're not really even ours. We didn't create our bodies or the earth we walk on. We don't beat our own hearts or give ourselves the power to move and think and speak. Everything we are is a reflection of greater powers than we can know, and our true strength comes in aligning ourselves with those greater powers. Energy flows naturally from the higher to the lower. We receive our power from above, and our true strength comes in being in conscious relationship with the higher, where our weakness relative to it is the invitation for it to fill us with its boundless strength. Now, that's an example of one of those paragraphs from Guy Finley that's just one sentence. So I'm going to just read it again and make sure that the pieces fit together. Energy flows naturally from what is higher to what is lower. We receive our power from above. In other words, from that which is more powerful, or that which has a deeper connected resonance than we have in our individual conscious logical mind. We receive our powers from above, and our true strength comes in being in a conscious relationship with those higher energies, those stronger, more integrated, more wise energies. Because in that dynamic, if we acknowledge a need, if we extend the invitation, if we acknowledge our weakness and invite strength in, it's the very fact that we have less power that serves as an invitation for this excess of power to flow into us and fill us with its boundless strength. But if I'm sitting here thinking with the Dunning-Kruger effect in full force, that I am the master of my destiny and I decide what's going to happen around here and I'm in charge of this house and relationship. If I'm coming from that space, I'm feeling, proclaiming, wishing for more strength than I actually have. From that space, there's no emptiness. There's no space for that greater strength to fill me. There's no acknowledgement of a need for more power, strength, connection. So I absolutely need to acknowledge that I don't have the kind of strength and power that's available in the universe, that's available in the world, that gave rise to me, that's given rise to the planetary systems. I don't have that kind of power in me, and yet it can flow through me if I invite it, if I acknowledge my weakness relative to that greater power. So Guy Finley goes on and says that this truth has been expressed by the great sages across the centuries. Here are some quotations for us to ponder. A person whose name is spelled Philokalia, Philokalia is my guess at how to pronounce it, is quoted as saying, "My grace is sufficient for thee, because my strength is made perfect in thy weakness." I guess that's from the New Testament. And then Philokalia writes, "Peter of Damascus assures us that," quote, Nothing is better than to realize one's weakness and ignorance, and nothing is worse than to not be aware of them. Close quotes. And I mentioned earlier the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it's just researchers who came across this phenomenon that is laid out kind of this way, that people who are relatively ignorant on a topic but possess a little bit of knowledge about it tend to think they know a lot more than they really do. They tend to think that they're experts at something. And in truth, the people who are expert in a field are generally those who have wakened to realize how much more there is to learn than they can comprehend. So the people who are really well versed, the people who are experts in a topic, tend to understand they've got a lot more to learn. And the people who are just with a little bit of information and fairly ignorant about a topic, they have a tendency to fall into the belief that they know what they need to know, that they're the expert. And so here is Philokalia from 300 to somewhere between 300 current era and 1400 current era. I don't know why there's not a more specific reference for that, but anyway, he writes that Peter of Damascus assures us that, quote, nothing is better than to realize one's weakness and ignorance. Well, in the Western world, that's the opposite of what we're taught. We aren't taught to look and to notice our ignorance and our weakness. We aren't taught to ask for help. We aren't taught collaboration and cooperation. We're taught competition. Now, those three words all begin with the letter C, but they're very different in their impact. So nothing is better than to realize one's weakness and ignorance, and nothing is worse than not to be aware of them. Then Isaac of Nineveh, that's my guess at how to pronounce Nineveh, is quoted here saying, when God sees that in all purity of heart you are trusting in him more than yourself, then a strength unknown to you will come to make its dwelling in you, and you will feel in all your senses the power of him who is with you. Then Ralph Waldo Emerson, our strength grows out of our weakness. The indignation which arms itself with secret forces does not awaken until we are pricked and stung and sorely assailed. A great man is always willing to be little. Whilst he sits on the cushion of advantages, he goes to sleep. When he is pushed, tormented, defeated, he has a chance to learn something. He has been put on his wits, on his manhood. He has gained facts, learns his ignorance. He's cured of the insanity of conceit. He's got moderation and real skill. The wise man throws himself on the side of his assailants. It is more his interest than it is more in his interest than it is theirs to find his weak point. In other words, when my enemy finds my weak point, that's something that my enemy might use for his or her advantage. When I find my weak point, I can grow. Guy Finley writes, and finally, a hauntingly beautiful quote from Leonard Cohen that makes it so clear that our imperfections, our weaknesses, are the opening that capital L love is looking for to transform us. And here's a quote from Leonard Cohen. Ring the bell that still can ring. Forget the perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Ring the bell that can still ring. Forget the perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Leonard Cohen. The next section is titled, To See Our Weakness is to Invite God's Strength, or the Creator's Strength. Guy Finley writes, the hardest part of the journey along the upward path is the gradual realization that one's work to awaken is at best imperfect. Along the ascending path, each footfall serves to echo an unwanted reminder of one's imperfect actions. Imperfect thoughts, imperfect emotions, imperfect devotion, imperfect attention, and so forth, on and on and on. However, seeing the truth of oneself in this light is but half the trial, and in some ways, the lesser of the challenges to be faced along the way. The greater part of this difficulty, and perhaps the most, quote, slippery, close quotes, part of the path, is the temptation to judge oneself and or to loathe oneself for whatever supposed weakness has been exposed. The act of judging oneself in times like these seems natural, that's what we've been trained into, and even necessary if one hopes to ever, quote, outgrow, close quotes, one's own limitations as they've been revealed. However, unseen in this kind of self-laceration is this spiritual fact. All forms of self-judgment are a Trojan horse. Within its recesses hides the unthinkable. Quote, the pain of resisting in this present level of yourself is itself an unseen part of that same level of self now being resisted. In other words, you can't separate the pain you're feeling from the part of you that's trying to resist the flow of life in that moment. That the pain is only created at the level it's being created, at the intensity it's being created through the process of resisting what life is bringing. Yes, for some of us, on a regular basis, what life brings us results in physical discomfort or social difficulties or financial stresses. And yet, when we pile on top of that, self-judgment, self-loathing, etc., we amplify, we lock in the pain. So the greater part of this difficulty is not just recognizing that I have a weakness or I have a deficit in knowledge or I'm ignorant in some way. The harder part is resisting the negative judgment that's been modeled for me and trained into me. Guy Finley goes on. Now, to this last fact, add the following important idea. When one's attention is drawn to how much one doesn't want to be what one is in that moment, one can't see oneself as one actually is. All right, here's an important fact. When your attention is drawn to how much you don't want to be who or what you are in the moment, in that moment, you can't actually see yourself as you actually are. This means that all forms of resistance-born reactions, anything I do out of tightness or tension or resistance, right, is counterproductive. They are blinding agents. They mask the fact of the moment with powerful unwanted sensations, and those sensations steal your attention. So that instead of being self-aware in the moment and conscious of the wholeness of yourself, you're only aware of the painful reaction and what it points to as being the cause of your suffering. So you think this outside event that you've identified is the cause, when actually it may have nothing to do with it. It may have just arisen at the same time. I remember we had family friends when I was growing up, and they had a car dealership, and we had cars that were that make that model, and my dad, was friends with this guy, and so we trusted him. He was a good guy, and we trusted the mechanic's advice we got there. And one time, my dad took the car in because there was a significant problem, and um, not long after he got it back and that problem's resolved, the car's fixed and running well, a headlight on the right side and a tail light on the rear end go out. Now, friends of my dad's who don't really know this car dealership owner mechanic guy started saying, "Oh, that's a well-known scam. What they do to people, they get you in there, they fix one thing and they break three others. And they set them up so that they'll either broken right now or they'll break in the next week or two. And that's how they keep their money flowing in." Now, my dad knew better than that. He knew it's just a coincidence or some other set of factors that was causing the light bulbs to go out on his car. He knew better than to think his friend was trying to nickel and dime him with false car repairs. But just because these two things happened in close proximity to each other, the fact that he took the car in there to get an alternator repaired, and then soon after that, the headlight on one side and the tail light on the other side quit working, it doesn't mean there's a cause and effect relationship there. We think so often if two things happen in close proximity that one causes the other. We're programmed to try and look for those cause and effect relationships. As a matter of fact, we're literally taught to overpredict cause and effect relationships, and many of us have no idea how destructive that process is. So instead of being one of those people who arrives at a conclusion and says, "Aha, I know this is what's happening," and then acting from that conclusion, it's far better, from my personal experience, to live life in the active state of observing and questioning. Oh, this is what seems to be happening. I wonder what the truth is. I wonder what we'll discover if we go into this with our eyes open, knowing that we don't know everything, and whatever it is we think we know is only partially true at best, and perhaps even completely false. What can life teach me in this next moment? If we go in that way, if we refuse to keep piling on these negative thoughts about self and feeding these negative conclusions about self, which, as Guy Finley points out here in the previous text, every one of those negative thoughts is a Trojan horse. Every one of those negative thoughts about myself. I let it into my mind. I treat it as real. I think it might help me to understand more about myself. It's just creating more pain. And it prevents me from seeing the truth of myself and the dynamics between me and the world around me. So as soon as you're focused on how you don't want the situation or you wish you were different, the focus on what I want to be different blinds me to the truth of what actually is. And if I can't see the things the way they actually are, I can't work at them. I can't improve them. I can't move them forward in a way that I like the consequences. This means, as Guy Finley says here, that all forms of resistance-born actions and reactions blind us. They blind us to the fact of the moment. And they blind us with these powerful unwanted sensations of the pain, the fear, the sadness, the worry, the obsession, so that instead of being fully aware of ourselves, conscious of the whole of oneself, we're only aware of that painful reaction, and we're only aware of what our mind is telling us is causing that painful reaction. Guy Finley goes on, despising oneself for missing the mark doesn't prove that one could have hit the mark and didn't. It proves only that the dark nature involved in this kind of pain doesn't know what the true mark is. When you generate a negative thought about yourself, when you generate self-loathing or despising thoughts about yourself, it does not prove that you could have hit the mark and didn't. What it proves is you've been distracted. That part of you doesn't even know what the actual target should be for your mind energy, for your efforts. When you have a negative thought about yourself, it doesn't prove you know what's right, or if you try harder, you'll get better. It simply proves that the dark nature of your mind, this what Michael Rice would call the 9-bit mind, and Guy Finley would call the mechanical level of mind, and many people would call the ego or the wounded ego. It just proves that that part of you doesn't know what the actual target is, what the actual mark you should be aiming for is. The deception is deep and dark. Guy Finley goes on and writes, the deception is deep and dark. To hate oneself for one's weakness is the way weakness passes itself off as strength. I'll read that again. To hate oneself for one's weaknesses is the way that weakness passes itself off as strength. I think it makes me smarter to beat myself up for not knowing more. And that can only come from ignorance. He goes on, real spiritual strength is realized slowly by daring to drop these self-blinding negative states, these negative thoughts, which, for better or worse, we've allowed these thoughts to define us. And the real spiritual strength is realized by slowly daring to drop these, question them, drop them, laugh at them. Don't treat them as real. Don't pour your mind energy into them as though, oh, here's a revelation. I'm lower than whale poop, and etc. Believe it or not, this choice to no longer agree or to ache over what you are not, this choice is the most difficult part of one's work to be free. Choosing to disconnect your association from, your identification with all these negative thoughts and labels about you is the hardest part of your work to be free. He goes on, after all, when there is no one and nothing left within yourself to blame for your weakness, it's also pretty clear that turning to one's, quote, self, close quote, for help is like asking a donkey for the directions to heaven. So Guy Finley tells the story. I know I've repeated it before here, but he tells a variety of different stories. The primary theme is that, well, it's summarized in this quote from Guy that says, it is absolutely necessary that every effort you make to find God, to know God, to connect with your source fails. Absolutely necessary that every attempt you make to know God, to find God, to get enlightened, whatever, that it fails miserably, because it's only then when you quit struggling with the stuff that you can generate with your 9-bit mind that life itself can lift you up, that the creator, that God, that light, that love can inform you. Because the way the system is set up, no force outside of you can come in and change you if you don't invite it. So the last paragraph, my brain's going all over with different Guy Finley stories, but I'll finish this last paragraph in this section. And then Guy writes again, this is a never-ending journey. It doesn't begin with our wish to awaken, but with God working in us to awaken us to the otherworldly nature of capital L love. If we agree to go through what is asked of us in this way, then it is through our marriage to this greater divine life and the interior labor that this calls for, it's through that marriage that we gradually realize a conscious relationship with that capital L love that is the same as capital L life unending, or, eternal life, as they talk about it in other writings. The time will come, if you persist, when you will learn to see your weakness as the only way in which God can bring you into its strength. The time will come, if you persist, when you learn to see your weakness as the invitation for something greater to inform you, to lift you up, to transform you. There's a thing flooding into my awareness now. I worked with a woman a while back, and she's just very bright, very loving, very emotionally sensitive, and high-strung, and she was going off to do a very intense camp for people who've lost a family member in active duty service in any of the first responder positions, soldiers, firemen, police, etc. And these families, which have been powerfully impacted by the loss of a loved one while on duty in one of these serving professions, is extraordinarily intense. And she was worried about her ability to do it well or be of assistance to people. But she finally pulled up her courage and she went. And when she came back from it, she sat down in my office and really surprised me, because she said, you know what I learned? I learned that the more I asked for help, the stronger I felt. And she said, before I went there, I was holding the belief that if you have to ask for help, it means you're weak and stupid. And what she learned by going out into life, by putting herself out there, by taking a risk, by staying connected to me, I was just the tether. It's nothing special about me, but staying connected to somebody who could see her value and worth from the outside, who wasn't constantly bombarded by all the negative messages that her intellect was feeding her because of the past family traumas, etc. When I was sitting outside of her, free from the influences of her well-rehearsed self-loathing monologue, I could see her brilliance, I could see her strength, I could see her loving nature, and encourage her that she's going to be okay, that she's going to be fine, that she's going to be a real blessing to others when she's there. And she went in believing that if you have to ask for help, it means you're weak and stupid, and there's something wrong with you. And what she learned from the direct experience of being in that situation and using whatever support I could give her to go ahead and ask for help, what she learned was every time she asked for help, she felt stronger. Things worked out better. That's the same message that Guy Finley is trying to get us. Guy Finley and Dr. Ellen Dickstein are trying to get us to just start observing for ourselves. So I think that's all I'm going to read from Guy Finley's book today. That's the end of that segment. And we have plenty of time for comments and questions. There have been people who've been making these little floaty things. Sally says that's her favorite Leonard quote. And so we have time for comments, questions, answers, testimonies. If you got here late and you didn't hear me talk about Dr. Roger McFillin in his latest podcast on the Radically Genuine, latest episode on the Radically Genuine podcast. It's about attention deficit disorder, and it's about all kinds of good analysis of what that label is and what the phenomenon is, and good ideas for approaching a solution to the struggles that people face without just throwing medications at them. So,
Sally here. I just have one thing. Thank you for reviewing the beginning half because I was taking my mom to the dentist and I missed the Roger McFillin podcast, Radically Genuine, which I'll check out right later. I want to say that yesterday, my mother, or Monday, she asked if I'd like to go to my sister's birthday party last night. And normally I would say yes and go along because it's the right, it feels like the right thing to do for my sister. And I've been working with that book, Fawning, and kind of moving beyond the people pleasing. And I was so happy that I took a moment. I said to my mother, let me think about it through. Am I
okay,
fawning? Am
Sally,
I just people?
stop.
Yeah.
Okay, so your signal was breaking up there a little bit. I think I caught all the words, but back up a sentence or two.
Okay.
Something about you were so glad that what?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there's a little gurgling every once in a while, but go ahead, try it again.
Okay. Yeah, I was glad that I took the moment to think about it, to pause, because I was able to recognize I was going to please everyone else. And there was not a part of me that wanted to go. And
Excellent.
so I came back to my mom and I said, if it's okay and you don't need me, I'm going to pass. And she said, okay, that sounds great. I'll tell you all about it when we get back. And last night, while they all went to the birthday party, I washed my hair. I got it cut. I had so much fun in the time that I would have been dutifully at that birthday party, and it was all just because I did what I felt was right for me. And I just
What a radical idea.
radical for this girl. It was great. So thanks for sharing. Thanks for all the things that show up in this radio show. And I'll breathe.
Well, you're entirely welcome and deserving, and congratulations on whatever level you're at of breaking out of the cocoon of believing that you aren't worth taking care of.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's especially when you're in the position as you are now as caretaker to someone, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
your mother or a friend, or that role of caretaker is so draining.
Oh,
It's rewarding, right? I wouldn't have traded it for anything. The ability, I have tears coming up just saying this, the ability to be, and these are like tears of gratitude, right? The
mm-hmm.
ability to have been there for both of my parents in the last stages of their lives was a huge gift. And it was a drain of energy, right? It's I'm still functioning at this level of a physical body in a physical realm. And things happen if I don't get enough sleep, and things happen if I, don't have the money to purchase something that I think I need, and things happen in my energy system and physiology if I believe I'm being, attacked. So I still have to deal with that. And it's a finite set of resources that I'm dealing with as long as I'm here in the body. So yeah, it's wonderful. I wouldn't trade it for anything. It was a huge blessing. And it was a drain of energy like very few I've ever had in my life before. And if I don't recognize that, if I don't pay attention to my energy expenditures and I don't find a way to replenish them and I don't find a way to balance or gain some balance in my life, then I get the consequences, and they're not very pleasant. And sometimes they can be downright destructive if I get way too out of balance. So I appreciate the comment, and I'm glad that you are choosing, or you chose anyway. I hope you continue to choose for yourself and what's best for you. One of the ways I say this to a lot of people over the years in my office is, listen, please try and understand that despite whatever you're thinking in your head, whatever your family has taught you, it cannot be bad for anyone who cares about you if you do what's best for you.
Mm.
Let me just say that one more time. It can only be good for the people around you when you do what is truly good for you, even if they don't like it. It's good for them, even if they don't like it. And you're not doing it because you want it to be good for them. You're just to keep the focus on those things you have control over in your life. And when you do what's truly good for you, it will also be good for everyone that cares about you.
Amen.
Also everyone else, period. But, right in that moment, you're probably focused on mom or dad or kids or siblings or whatever. And that's where the biggest kind of a pressure cooker comes, when I think I know what they would want and I know what I would want and they don't match. And in our culture, way too often, those people who are labeled, quote, nice people, good people, caring people, they end up doing things that are not good for them. And they think in some mistaken way that they're doing that and it's helping others. But if it's hurting you, it's not helping anybody else in the big picture. So, hoping that lands for somebody. And thank you, Sally, for your comments. Thank you, Susan, for your comments earlier. I'll remind us all that this is a Thursday, so there will be a support group tonight from 6:30 to 9 p.m. Central Time. All the information you might need on how to join us, absolutely free, is available on mindshiftersacademy.org website. And please remember there's a separate login number for Thursday.